Hi everyone, Croeso, welcome. My name is Andy Cooke and I'm a senior lecturer here at Bangor University in Sport, Health and Exercise Science, and I'm really very pleased today to have the opportunity to deliver this online lecture where I'm going to briefly introduce you to something that really fascinates me, and that is the psychophysiology branch of sports psychology. And within that, we're going to talk about neurofeedback, a cutting-edge method of brain training that can help give athletes the leading edge. And in doing so, I hope this is going to give you a sample of the sort of sports science content you can expect to cover with me if you studied here at Bangor University. So the learning objectives for this session. By the end of this session, I hope to have instilled you with enough information to be able to define the term psychophysiology and also to describe how neurofeedback training works. I also hope that you'll be able to recognize why I really think that these should be really important areas in a modern sports science curriculum. Finally, I hope you'll be able to gain an appreciation for the sort of research-led teaching you can expect here at Bangor University, and also the sort of student research projects you will have the opportunity to be involved in if you study here in Bangor. So without further ado, psychophysiology, what is this term? What is this branch of science? Well, some of you might have encountered it before, but if you haven't, I just encourage you to just take a moment now to think about what that term might mean. And if you've done that, I'd like to bet that whatever you've come up with is pretty close to the mark, because psychophysiology is what it says on the tin, really. It's an interdisciplinary branch of performance science that looks at the interaction between mind and bodily processes in order to understand human behaviour. And in this image here on the slide, you can actually see a participant in one of my psychophysiological experiments, and we're recording simultaneously his brain waves, his muscular tension, his cardiovascular activity, his grip force, his impact velocity, in order to answer some really interesting questions that are at the core really of sports science. So for instance, this approach can allow us to understand the mechanisms that underpin human movement. It can also allow us to understand the mechanisms that sometimes fail under psychological pressure. For instance, when an athlete is under elevated pressure, what effect does this have on their brainwaves? Is that responsible for the change in performance? Does it have an impact on their muscular tension, for example? These are the sorts of really interesting performance-driven questions that we can answer with this psychophysiological approach. And importantly, I actually adopted this approach in an experiment that was published in 2014, and I was really excited to reveal a pattern of brainwave that was actually associated with performance success. So I revealed a particular frequency of brainwave that occurred 2 seconds before movement that was able to predict whether or not the subsequent putt was going to go in the hole or whether it was going to miss. Now that was really exciting because it gives us some information about the mechanisms that underpin human movement, but also it allows us to use psychophysiology to address a next generation of research questions. Specifically, how can we use psychophysiology to customize training programs to optimize human performance? And so that's what I'm going to talk to you about now via a form of brain training called neurofeedback, something that I've been working on here at Bangor University for the last 10 years or so. So neurofeedback training is a cutting-edge type of brain training that involves recording an individual's brainwaves and then displaying those brainwaves back via brain-computer interface technology in order to help the individual to learn how to take control of their brainwaves, how to get into the zone, and how to remain in the zone for optimal performance when it matters the most. Now you might be thinking, how does brain training work? Well, I can give you an analogy via heart rate. So I'd like to think that most of you at some stage would have recorded your heart rate. In fact, some of you right now might be wearing wristwatches, might have smartphones that have got heart rate monitoring technology built into them. Now, if you record your heart rate, you can learn pretty quickly that if you start thinking about particularly exciting or perhaps stressful thoughts, your heart rate might increase a bit. Conversely, if you use imagery to picture yourself on a very relaxing beach, for instance, your heart rate might decrease a little. In essence, you can learn how via your thoughts you can control a physiological signal, in this case your heart rate. Well, neurofeedback training works off exactly the same principles. So by actually displaying an individual's brainwaves back to them, they can learn surprisingly very, very quickly how to actually take control of their brainwaves and produce particular patterns of brainwaves that might be conducive for optimal performance. Now, if you're still thinking that's a bit strange, I'm going to show you a video now to really illustrate that. So this is me in the laboratory here at Bangor with a couple of croquet players. You'll see this guy's brainwaves being fed back on the screen behind him, and you'll also hear an auditory tone. Now, that tone is set to silence when he produces the particular brainwave that is conducive for optimal ball striking in croquet. So his goal is to silence the brainwave, and when he does that, that means he's in the zone and he's free to hit his shot. So let's have a look at how that works. So he silences the tone and then he hits the shot. Let's see one more example of that. So he's trying to silence the tone. And when it's silent, he hits his shot. Now, that was just a brief training session, but I actually used this precise approach a few years ago now in what was one of the very first large-scale controlled neurofeedback experiments in a sample of golfers. And I actually trained some of these golfers to produce the pattern of brainwaves that I previously revealed to be associated with golf putting success. And I was really excited to find that as a result of just 3 hours of brain training, the golfers who received this training were able to really take control of their brainwaves. And actually, after this brief period of training, there was some evidence that their performance actually improved. And so this was one of the first experiments of its kind. It's really exciting. It's actually since been replicated by other research laboratories in various parts of the world. And not only that, this technology has now been commercialized and is actually being used by some of the world's leading athletes to actually incorporate brain training in the field into their regular training programs. And to illustrate that, I'm going to briefly show you a video now of Britain's Justin Rose, Olympic champion, major winner, one of the top ranked golfers in the world, and he regularly uses now this neurofeedback training.
The technology is being used. Justin Rose is one of the world's leading golfers.
That's the hat I wear. So what this is basically like an EEG reading of my brain, left brain, right brain. It basically tells me if I'm being creative or analytical. So this is what I train with. So when I'm training my routines, I'm trying to, so we're getting basically feedback, digital feedback on my app to say, okay, yeah, I'm in the sweet spot, or no, I'm being too creative. What was that thought? What are you thinking about? Too analytical. So for me, this is even more important around the greens. Chipping and putting is where I feel like this is really, really key for me. I want to paint a picture, I want to see it, I want to react to it. And the guy who's coaching me can say, oh, you know, what happened halfway through that routine? I'll be like, yeah, I looked down, I just felt like I wasn't really trusting my alignment. And so we're getting that real feedback now.
So I think that's a really interesting insight into how this cutting edge psychophysiological research and brain training research that we're leading on here in Bangor University is now being applied in the field by practitioners and by real life elite level athletes. Now, not only will you learn about this sort of neurofeedback research with me here at Bangor University, but all students at Bangor University also get the opportunity to do their own research project in their final year. And a few years ago now, I was approached by a student, Sophie, who was interested in neurofeedback training, and she was also interested in cycling. And in collaboration with Dr. Anthony Blanchfield and Dr. James Hardy, we set Sophie the task of actually identifying a candidate pattern of brainwaves that might be conducive to endurance cycling. And without going into too much detail, as a research team, we came up with the hypothesis that if we train cyclists to increase their left frontal activation, this might have a beneficial impact on their performance because it might increase their approach motivation and it might delay the urge to withdraw that sometimes could occur and limit performance in exhaustive exercise tasks. Now, to test this hypothesis, we ran a neurofeedback training experiment where Sophie delivered neurofeedback training immediately before student cyclists got on the bike and performed a performance to exhaustion test. And we were really excited to reveal that participants who received left frontal neurofeedback training were actually able to cycle for around 30% longer than people who received either no training or who received a different kind of brain training intervention. In fact, we were so blown away by this finding that we had another student, Francesca Matolla, actually replicate and extend this experiment a couple of years ago. And she found really similar findings. So we're really excited by that. And Francesca has now submitted her research project for publication. And I forecast that this will be published in a leading sports science journal in the coming year. And this will make a really big impact, I think, on the cycling community. This is the first finding of its kind. So we're really excited by that. Finally, I'm aware that I've talked about neurofeedback and sport to now, and some of you might be more interested in health and exercise. So I'm going to end on this final student project. This was a project that I conducted with Amanpreet Sidhu, and she was interested in applying to neurofeedback to health, and particularly to movement rehabilitation. We had the idea that neurofeedback might be useful in helping people to relearn fundamental motor skills following injury or illness. And so to test that hypothesis, we developed a neurofeedback experiment. We implemented people with a leg brace to immobilize their knee joint and therefore help them to actually learn to walk in a new, different way as might occur after illness or injury. And we had them perform a standardized clinical test, and we looked at the effects of neurofeedback on their rate of relearning. And we were really excited to reveal that a particular type of neurofeedback focused on increasing cortical activation over key motor and locomotion brain areas was actually able to accelerate relearning, and we also found some evidence that it did this by increasing the automaticity of this new motor skill. So this is really exciting for us. It's exciting implications for many clinical domains, and this was actually published at the end of 2020 in a leading international journal, Experimental Brain Research, and I'm really proud of that. In fact, consistently here at Bangor University, the best student projects each year often get published in high-level international journals. And this is something that you don't see, in my experience, very much at other universities. And it's testament to the really high-quality student and staff research that can be done here at Bangor University. And this publication also went some way to helping Amanpreet secure her dream job doing more in this research area in New Zealand. So she's done really well from this particular research experience. So we're really excited by that. And I hope that gives you a flavour of how this sort of research area can apply in both sport and health settings. So the take-home messages, if I revisit the learning objectives, I hope if you reflect yourself that you can now see all three of those objectives have been met. I hope you can define psychophysiology, explain neurofeedback training and recognise their importance. And I hope you get a feel for the importance of research-led teaching. And that's something that we're very proud of here in Bangor. You will definitely get that because you are taught by academics who are active researchers, who are doing the research themselves. You're not being taught out of textbooks. You're being taught by the people who are at the coalface, so to speak. That's really important in future-proofing your career. And finally, I'd also like to just emphasize something that I'm very proud of. Bangor has a long and proud history of being at the forefront of the sport, health and exercise science field. And I'd like to illustrate that by showing you a picture of the catastrophe model, something that some of you guys might have encountered before, because this is something that's actually become one of the dominant perspectives in the sport and stress and performance literature. And this is taught at universities and across high school curriculums the world over now. This is something that was born in Bangor University in 1991. So we've got this long and proud history of being at the forefront of the discipline. And I really believe that the sort of stuff that I've talked about today is very much at the forefront of the discipline today. And in studying it, you can help shape your future careers by ensuring that you're at the cutting edge of what is a really dynamic and interesting field of study. So I'll end there. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you very much, everyone, for your attention. I hope this has been of interest to you, and I look forward to welcoming some of you to Bangor University very soon. Thank you very much.